In August of 2022, I was researching the mass shooting at a 4th of July parade in Highland Park, Illinois, along with 3 other open-source intelligence researchers, when I stumbled on an unheard article written by Nama Cates about the alleged shooter Robert Crimo, and I decided to DM her. Nama is an ex-Hollywood actress who hosted a podcast called Incels, in which she interviewed various members of the fringe involuntarily celibate, or incel movement. Nama was also interested in researching mass shootings. In our early conversations, she referenced her friend Jade, who had many of the same beliefs as me, specifically that some recent mass shooters were being provoked and groomed by a rising terrorist threat known as accelerationism. Accelerationists, as I understood them, were a decentralized group of domestic terrorists, bound by their shared desire for societal collapse, after which they hoped to install a fascist regime in the smoldering ashes of the West. Functionally, these people are provocateurs who infiltrate various extremist movements and incite its members to commit acts of violence and destruction, as well as non-violent political activism to facilitate this end goal of collapse. I didn't know this at the time, but Nama's friend Jade was the military intelligence contractor specializing in counterterrorism who was responsible for identifying the accelerationist threat for the first time and sounding the alarm on it, or attempting to. Sometime in late 2022, Jade penned a series of tweets claiming she had used her research in accelerationism to identify the person who planted the pipe bombs at the Capitol prior to the January 6th riot. She became paranoid, her online behavior became frantic and erratic, and she put out a document online which she called a dead man's switch. And then, shortly after that, Jade vanished. Robert Crimo, the alleged Highland Park mass shooter, was a musician known as Awake the Rapper. He had hidden clues within an alternate reality game that he developed sometime prior to the shooting. We believe this could hold the key to decrypting his manifesto, which was a 27-page book containing nothing but numbers. I believed I'd found a hidden code within one of Robert Crimo's MP3 files. The code was hidden within the spectrographic information of the song, using a technique known as steganography. When I shared this finding with Nama, she was very interested, and she mentioned, unbelievably, that she and her friend Jade were doing the exact same thing with the exact same song file. And remember, I still didn't know who Jade was. It was just a passing reference in a conversation with a relative stranger. And so it didn't hit me at the time that Nama was sharing our open source research with a military intelligence asset who was investigating the same mass shooting in the same bizarre way. As time went on, Nama and I shared our thoughts and research on a variety of related issues, and our relationship remained cordial and collaborative for some time. That is, until I decided to venture inside the incel forum she so frequently mentioned and have a look around for myself. What I found there, beyond the rampant pedophilia and the deranged glorification of mass shooters and terrorists, was something much darker. This internet forum appeared to be harboring the very same accelerationist provocateurs that Nama and I had been discussing. And despite all of our discussions about domestic terrorism and mass shootings being incited by these same terrorists, Nama had been defending this website to me for months, whitewashing what was going on in there and attempting to downplay it as a hangout for harmless misanthropes. As I pushed back at her on this in our private conversation, she began to reveal to me that she wasn't just an impartial podcaster after all. She was a part of the so-called CVE, or Countering Violent Extremism community, a group of academics who compete for various grant opportunities to conduct research on extremist groups and share data with the government counterterrorism agencies. Our months-long conversation had quickly gone from cordial to hostile as I began to unravel the shadowy operations being conducted by Nama and her colleagues within the Incel Forum, some of them funded by the U.S. Department of Homeland Security TVTP grant program. That rabbit hole eventually led me to the DHS-funded censorship of the manosphere, which is a topic that warrants a completely separate video. As our conversation reached its boiling point, Nama revealed to me that the Incel Forum, a website full of extremists inciting quote-unquote incels to commit acts of domestic terrorism, specifically mass shootings, is a honeypot operation subjected to constant law enforcement monitoring and used to make arrests. Except the ones being arrested weren't the obvious terrorists, some of whom had been using the site for years and had amassed hundreds of thousands of posts attempting to incite terrorism. No, the ones being arrested were the largely mentally ill, neurodivergent misanthropes that were unfortunate enough to wander into this honeypot. But wait, hadn't Nama told me that she understood the threat of accelerationist terrorists, and that she'd also been looking into the role of those provocateurs in mass shootings? My mind wandered back to her friend Jade. Who was this person? Going off nothing except for a first name and an association with the CVE academia community, I began to search for her identity. I searched and searched, and eventually, in a stroke of luck, I stumbled upon an old tweet of Nama's regarding the Highland Park mass shooter, in which she tagged a now deleted Twitter account called Unmoderated. Purely on a hunch, I decided to search the Wayback Machine for this Twitter handle, and by another stroke of luck, I found that this Twitter was associated with someone named Jade Parker. Unfortunately, there were a lot of tweets to peruse from this account, and it would take some time, but now at least I had a name. An internet search of Jade Parker returned a few articles about accelerationism, along with a guest appearance on The Team House, a podcast hosted by two former Rangers that featured interviews with veterans and military experts. In this interview, Jade Parker, a former military intelligence contractor working for the Army's Joint Special Operations Command Group, described her role in conducting cyber warfare operations against ISIS. After detailing her extensive credentials and storied career fighting terrorism, she began to discuss her novel research in the field of accelerationism. In particular, she stated that her peers in counterterrorism research were mistaken when they declared the Capitol Hill protesters to be accelerationists, and said that the more likely scenario is that the January 6th crowd was exploited by accelerationists, seeking to further divide the country.
I have never been more terrified when I figured out a lot of stuff that these guys were doing, and no one believed me. And no one cared. And people thought that I had gone off the deep end. Because, at the time, everyone was all about the lone wolf white supremacists. Mm-hmm. Lone wolf white supremacists this, everybody's a white supremacist, and as everyone was gradually kind of proven wrong about various things, then the definition of far right very much expanded beyond what it had been before, which is fascism and militias. The purpose of counterterrorism efforts is the preservation of the stability of the United States and people who want to overthrow the government.
Jade is perhaps being overly generous to her colleagues here, implying that they made a mistake, as opposed to an intentional conflation of accelerationist terrorists with the right wing. Later, I would come to believe that Jade had a tendency to do just this, to assume the best in her colleagues and in her government. This is a woman who spent a long and accomplished career unquestionably believing that the people she was taking orders from were the good guys. Jade further claimed that accelerationists had infiltrated a number of fringe movements in an attempt to manipulate its members and repurpose the group for its own sinister agenda, which was to accelerate the collapse of the US government. Among these movements that were infiltrated by accelerationists were QAnon, the January 6th protests, and the incels. It suddenly made sense to me why Jade would be working with someone like Nama. She was researching the terrorists that were controlling the incel community, the ones that incited them to commit mass shootings and other acts of domestic terrorism, all within an internet forum that Nama later admitted to me was a Fed honeypot. Did Jade know this? I returned to her tweet archives, hoping to find something to help me understand what was going on. What I found was a series of increasingly frantic and bizarre tweets. It seemed that Jade believed that she had been double-crossed by her colleagues in counterterrorism research, that they had stolen her novel research on accelerationism, repurposed it for their own agendas, and then ousted her from her own community. Her colleagues had taken her research and modified critical aspects of it, such as conflating the January 6th protesters with accelerationists, and had presented her research as such before Congress. As her tweets became more desperate and disjointed, she made some alarming claims, stating that she had used her research to determine the identity of the person who planted bombs on Capitol Hill on January 6th, along with their associated network. She teased that she hadn't given the name to anyone yet, and that it was information worth $100,000 to the Department of Justice. She posted this alongside a Google document link, which she referred to as her dead man switch. Unfortunately, the document wasn't easily accessible from the tweet archive, forcing me to click through each one individually. I was sure that I wouldn't be able to find it, or that it would have been scrubbed offline along with the rest of her tweets. But as luck would have it, in one of the JSON archives, I found it, and unbelievably, it was still accessible. And that's how I found Jade's Dead Man Switch, which she had titled The Origins of Accelerationism. Jade's writing is incredibly dense and difficult to digest, over 90 pages of it. The purpose seems to be proving that she had been the first person to identify this emerging terror organization. She had informed many of her colleagues about it, hoping that they would use their pull and authority to spread the word. She even claims to have gone to a government agency and pleaded with them to listen to her, telling them that they could stop these lone wolf mass shootings, which according to her, weren't lone wolf shootings at all, but people who had been manipulated and groomed by accelerationists posing as members of various extremist communities. But rather than helping her, Jade's colleagues stole her work and distorted it. Several of them had even created research consortiums and organizations based around her research, while specifically excluding her. These same colleagues smeared and discredited her within academia. They pushed her out the door, closed it behind her, and locked it. Then they took her research as their own and reframed it as something completely different. Now, an online search for accelerationism returns articles in which is defined as a term used by white supremacists and extremist groups to refer to their desire to hasten the collapse of society. I can only imagine how angry this must have made Jade, the original whistleblower, who was trying to make everyone understand that these people weren't white supremacists, or MAGA, or incels, but rather something else entirely. Jade was right that her research was important. It was so important that it had to be controlled. Just as Naama had said, Jade and I were on the same page without ever having met each other. We both saw mass shooters being provoked by shadowy provocateurs who didn't seem to be associated with recognized extremist groups. But in her document, Origins of Accelerationism, was one other very important aspect that I hadn't picked up on or seen mentioned elsewhere. And this is where things get extra weird. Jade believed that a spooky satanic cult was key to understanding the accelerationist movement. The Order of Nine Angles is a fringe satanic neo-Nazi movement which has been framed as a decentralized satanic organization obsessed with ritual murder, pedophilia, and other sinister practices. But according to Jade, there's more to the story. O9A members use manipulation, trickery, and deceit to get unwitting people to do their sinister bidding. These unwilling patsies are called opfers, and they're often linked to extremist groups like neo-Nazis, white supremacists, and even to fringe movements like QAnon and the incels. See, members of O9A infiltrate these communities, posing as fellow ideologues. They select specific members as opfers and provoke them to commit mass shootings, acts of domestic terrorism, and other crimes. The bigger goal of all of this is to exploit media bias and deepen the divide between the US political right and left wings. So they may, for example, pose as a white supremacist to convince another member of the group to target a black community in a mass shooting, or an anti-LGBT person to commit a shooting at a gay bar, or an incel to commit a shooting at a university, using an AR-15 of course, which Jade identified as the accelerationist weapon of choice due to its unique ability to trigger gun control debates.
Why is there gun violence? What is the root issue? What is the root cause of it? Because that's the only way we can see it, change. That's the only way we can see a change.
Jade also claimed that a major component of this provocation is the use of alternate reality games. In this way, Jade says, accelerationists have convinced people that they're playing a heroic role in an extravagant tale. You may have picked up on this already, but the people most prone to this sort of magical thinking are mentally ill, neurodivergent, and other vulnerable types of people. The types of people you find lurking in strange online chat room environments, like the Incel Forum. Convince one of these mentally ill people that the means justify the ends. They're a hero, a martyr, that they'll inspire others with their deadly act, or that by committing such an act, they'll be initiated or revealed some deep truth. All of this lined up perfectly with the strange anomalies we've been noticing while researching mass shooters.
A 20-year-old kid found on the floor of a women's bathroom at a Colorado amusement park suffered from a self-inflicted wound to the head. Turns out he had quite the weaponry on him. AR-style rifle, semi-automatic pistol, explosives, some real, some fake. Tactical gear and body armor. And then written on the wall was this: look, I don't know what happened to this kid, but it looks like he beat the programming.
Jade's connection of mass shootings to Order of Nine Angles was a major holy shit moment for me, because I'd been seeing the same spooky Satanists attempting to provoke misanthropic young men inside the Incel Forum, the same forum that Naama Kates, the Hollywood actress turned Fed adjacent, seemed to be running defense for. What was really going on here? Inside the incel forum, accounts linked to the O9A posted PDFs of terrorist material related to the group. One account in particular, with the username Michael W. Ford, frequently posted links to a Discord server. The same account made posts about satanic rituals in which an incel could kill themselves and become a revenge ghost, taking aim in the afterlife against those who hurt them. He posts about ritual sacrifice, including pictures of dead dogs killed during satanic rituals. He posts links to obscene pornographic content and Lolita porn, a code commonly used in the pedophile community. Basically, this account exists to provoke incels to commit a variety of disgusting and sinister acts. It makes sense that Jade would be particularly interested in the incel community, especially if she believes, as I do, that it represents a unique opportunity to study these cult members as they perform their sinister work. But there's a problem. Something that I know, but that Jade never acknowledged. The founder of the US Nexian of Order of Nine Angles is, and pretty much always has been, a paid FBI informant. Joshua Caleb Sutter played an important role in establishing the white supremacy movement within the US as it currently exists today, and he was a paid informant pretty much the entire time. He was an informant for at least a decade before he formed the Temple of Blood, which is the US Nexian for O9A. Joshua Sutter had also been identified in multiple court documents as the informant responsible for sting operations that brought down other accelerationist terror cells, like Atomwaffen Division and the National Socialist Order. Though this information is by all accounts public, it has never been publicly acknowledged in the mainstream media, despite occasional mentions of O9A in the news. Recently, the FBI linked O9A to a self-harm and pedophilia cult, which they called 764. The group is responsible for using platforms like Discord to convince children to self-harm, send explicit sexual material of themselves, and even commit suicide. The FBI claims that this cult is an offshoot of O9A and recently congratulated themselves on finding and arresting the ringleader of the group in Hawaii. But O9A chatter about the incident reveals that many of them believe the 764 cult members are actually opfers, and others believe it's purely a fed-op, representing a concerted effort to link the group to the O9A in an attempt to further demonize the group in the eyes of the public. It's odd that Jade Parker doesn't specifically discuss January 6 in her document, considering that she spams it alongside her tweets claiming to have identified the group responsible. Is Jade implying that Order of Nine Angles were the provocateurs that incited the protesters that day? I can't say I'd be too surprised. If there's one odd theme that keeps popping up all over the place in my research, it's Satanism.
Now, if we pull back the next layer of the mysterious cult, Order of Nine Angles, back to before the federal informant founded the US branch, to the group's origins, we find even more spooky people involved. David Myatt, who's widely recognized as one of the group's founders, is a British neo-Nazi who's connected to a Cold War-era program called Operation Gladio. Operation Gladio was a covert network of clandestine stay-behind forces in Western Europe, set up post-World War II with the support of the CIA and other intelligence agencies. The tactics used in Operation Gladio were part of the so-called Strategy of Tension, a political policy where an atmosphere of violence and terror is cultivated within a state, with the ultimate goal of sowing fear and doubt throughout the population. These tactics included the use of assassination, psychological warfare, and false flag operations to delegitimize left-wing parties in Western European countries. The fearful population would then be more likely to embrace an overly authoritarian government, thereby exchanging their freedoms for safety. The time period during which Operation Gladio was sanctioning terror attacks throughout Italy corresponds with the origins of Order of Nine Angles, and the time period during which David Myatt led the satanic group through a period of growth. Myatt was also involved with a paramilitary neo-Nazi organization, Column 88 at the time, an organization which is widely recognized by many to be part of the Gladio networks. Gladio is mentioned several times in Jade's document for its relevance to the mythological basis for accelerationism. The connection to Satanism isn't as bizarre and unbelievable as it may first seem. Intelligence agencies have a history of using links to Satanism to undermine organizations by turning the tide of public opinion against them. Aleister Crowley, the man widely recognized as being the founding father of modern Satanism, has been argued by researchers to have been a secret agent, working for both the British MI6 and the CIA in covert operations circa World War II. In a similar manner, the branch of Order of Nine Angles operated by FBI informant Joshua Sutter was used to infiltrate the accelerationist organization Atomwaffen Division. The integration of Satanism into the operation of Atomwaffen created conflict among its members, resulting in a fracturing of the network, after which Sutter's work as an informant resulted in the arrest of the group's leaders. Now, Jade's theory really isn't a stretch at all when you consider that the tactics of the provocateurs of the January 6th Capitol riot, as well as the general incitement of terrorism commonly seen in online chat rooms, mirror the tactics of Operation Gladio. And while Operation Gladio may have been dissolved long ago, the strategy of tension is still being used quite effectively. And all of this is occurring in plain sight, provided, of course, that we're capable of opening our eyes to it. Unfortunately, we can't ask Jade for her opinion on these things because her online existence completely disappeared shortly after the 4th of July mass shooting that we were both researching. According to Nama, Jade was preparing to take legal action against those who wronged her, but why would she erase all traces of herself off the internet? And why would she claim to have information relevant to the January 5th pipe bomb mystery? Such a discovery could be extremely important to unraveling what happened the next day at the Capitol. And various other sources, such as FBI whistleblower Kyle Seraphin, has speculated that the FBI may be suppressing information regarding the pipe bomber's identity. Ken Silva with Headline USA recently attempted to reach Jade, but said Parker could not be reached for comment. Her colleagues didn't respond to emails, and the FBI has refused to answer questions about its investigation. So what happened to Jade? Well, I don't really know. It's possible she was threatened by the Niners for getting too close to the fire. Around the time of her going dark, well before I had ever even heard of her, I was given an anonymous warning about this very thing, and I've come to believe this person was actually Jade, though I don't know for sure. It's also possible she went dark to pursue a lawsuit or for mental health reasons. Or maybe she came to the realization that things weren't as they seemed, and that the call was coming from inside the house. And if that were the case, who could blame her for wanting to disappear? Not long after I went public with what I'd seen inside the incel forum, Nama Cates, my only connection to Jade Parker, had an online episode of her own. She claimed that she was being gang-stalked by one of her CVE colleagues and delusionally attempted to claim that every person she was connected with on Twitter was part of some vast conspiracy against her. And then all of a sudden, after several years of consistent and prolific online activity, Nama disappeared too. Now all of this has left me in a strange position because suddenly 2 women who'd been researching the same exact online phenomena that I'd been researching have both vanished without a trace, and both of them exhibited alarming behavior immediately beforehand. Jade's findings seem really important, and she claimed to have information that could change the course of our country as we know it, and yet none of her colleagues have acknowledged her disappearance. Likewise, Nama was part of a Fed honeypot operation that was harboring the same people that Jade was attempting to whistleblow. And as for this short video, which really only breaks the surface of the situation, well, I just felt like I needed to put it out there into the public sphere, just in case.